Welcome to the Recovery 2.0 conference. I am your host, Tommy Rosen, and today I am just so thrilled to be speaking with Joe Polish and Benjamin Hardy. Benjamin Hardy is the #1 writer on Medium.com. His articles and essays are read by hundreds of thousands of people, and he is the author of the new acclaimed book, Willpower Doesn't Work. Joe Polish is an outstanding entrepreneur who helps other entrepreneurs to realize their dreams in business and life through both his Genius and 100K networks. Joe has an incredible story of recovery from addiction, all of his own, and he has devoted much of his time to changing the conversation globally about addiction and how to recover from it. I want to thank you both so much for being with me and for sharing your experience, strength, and hope with the Recovery 2.0 community. Benjamin, this is your first time presenting at Recovery 2.0. Thank you so much.
Dude, I love both of you. I'm just so glad to be here, man.
Yeah, this is great.
Awesome. Well, I want to preface this for the audience and say, for me, I'm just so thrilled to have met Benjamin Hardy. And this is a man who's writing, I've been reading for the past year, maybe 2 years, on Medium. And I get these emails from, I guess it's from Thrive Global or someone who repurposes what shows up on Medium, and they send it out. And every day it's Benjamin Hardy, and I'm reading all this incredible, grounded, actionable stuff that you've written, and I'm saying to myself in my house, I have got to meet this guy at some point. Who is he? It's as if he's writing directly to the recovery audience. So great to meet you. Thank you for your great work. And I want to cover some of the main topics in your new book, Willpower Doesn't Work. If you guys haven't yet purchased this book, either in written form or on Audible, right, on places you can listen to books, really do so. It's an incredible book and a game changer. I guess I'll start with the obvious question. Why doesn't willpower work?
Totally. Yeah, it's something that, we were talking about earlier today. Addiction, there's so much good, important information finally coming out about trauma, about suppressed emotions, about isolation. What happens when you experience trauma, you isolate yourself, you try to focus on, so there's so many angles. I'll first start with just willpower is trying to do something by yourself, right? And it's also focusing on just attempting it one single way. One thing that Tommy talked about today in a different conversation we're having is that you have to approach the subject of addiction holistically. You can't just focus on your behavior or just trying to do one thing. You have to hit it at all angles. You can call that brute force learning, you can call it brute force recovery, whatever it is, you have to take a holistic approach. And so with Willpower Doesn't Work, I just focused on the fact that you have an environment around you. You have all of these things that are influencing your behavior, and I'm a psychologist, and so I look at how does the environment influence behavior and identity. And what I noticed in the self-improvement world, because this book was not necessarily focused on addiction, although there's a lot of addiction in there. I wanted to write a self-improvement book, but then I really started digging into the addiction stuff because my father was a meth addict when I was in high school. My brother is heavy into addictions, and I've even experienced different forms in my life, you know what I mean? And so I just wanted to understand personal development from the perspective of addiction, because addiction's about changing behavior. And so Joe actually is one of the ones who's really brought a lot of my understanding of willpower even to the forefront, So what Joe has taught me is that the opposite of addiction is connection, right? And willpower is the opposite of connection. Willpower is trying to do it by yourself. It's trying to fight a silent battle. It's trying to grit your way through it. It's trying to muscle your way through it rather than getting help, being vulnerable, seeking community, shaping your situation, being holistic. And so, willpower, one of my favorite quotes is just what the addict needs, the last thing the addict needs is willpower. It actually makes the problem worse because you're isolating yourself even further.
Thank you so much. And what I'm thinking of as you're speaking is, interestingly, in the 12-step community, you've got this emphasis on relationship with spirit or God or higher power, if you will. So I think 12-step folks completely, utterly agree with the concept of willpower doesn't work. Only the way you're presenting it is a non-religious sort of approach. You're still saying exactly the same thing. We're going to need help. We're going to need to tap into something. But it's interesting that in a way, you're able to speak about that, removing any of the religious piece of it. So if you're interested in religion, spirituality, God, higher power, there's something available for you in the 12 steps. If you're interested in this concept of moving beyond isolation and moving beyond your own attempt to do this, which is futile, you've got a non-theistic approach as well, a very psychological approach and grounded. So I just like that there's many, many different ways to approach this thing.
Well, I mean, look, if you think of that term in 12 steps, and in the big book, self-will run riot, if you just think about what that means, self-will run riot, which is what happens when you're in active addiction. It's like trying to do it yourself, but it's going completely sideways. Because, there's author Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi who wrote a book called Flow, and he basically said that the same neural pathways that a top performer, athlete, entertainer uses to get into a state of flow is the same neural pathways that an addict uses for self-destruction. So it's like we're using these same lanes of how we get through life. And I know it's not just mind, but for the context of just thinking about it. But one leads to massive achievement and performance, and the other is self-destruction. And it always reminds me of one of my favorite quotes of Bill W., the founder, one of the founders of AA, where he said, as alcoholics, we're trying to drink God out of a bottle. So addicts are the most potentially spiritual. And I mean, even if someone's an atheist, I mean, if you just think about that, the connection to a source, some higher power, you're trying to connect. It is about connection. We're trying to drink God out of a bottle. If you're a gambling addict, you're trying to gamble your way to God. A sex addict, trying to get your fix through, you're trying to connect. So people that struggle with addictions are potentially the most spiritual people. It's just how they're going about trying to connect with that is just hurting them and maybe hurting others. And so that it's an interesting thing to think about. But what is the pursuit? And the whole thing about willpower doesn't work also reminds me of Bruce Alexander, who I've spoken with on the phone. He's the one that did all the Rat Park studies in the 70s. And if you put, I'm sure your community is quite familiar with that study.
I interviewed Bruce in our first ever Recovery 2.0 conference.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
5 years ago.
Yeah. And, the thing is he has proven that willpower doesn't work for rats, and it doesn't work any different for humans.
Yes.
So creating the environment, because no matter if you're doing 12 steps, if you're, working on your gut, the biochemistry, the things related to happy chemicals, serotonin and dopamine, if you're doing trauma work, if you're going to meetings, if you're doing Kundalini yoga, which you're a master at, but you're in a constantly stressful environment at work, at home, it's going to trigger you, and it's going to be very difficult to get recovery. So you want to look at all of these different approaches, and that's why I think Ben's book so much speaks to that.
Yes, thank you. Both of you have now invoked the word environment, and I can speak for my own experience in addiction. When I was in addiction, the environments I found myself were environments where addiction would and could and probably should take place.
Totally.
And when I look at the environments that I grew up in, I absolutely was entrained by environment in a way to sort of move in the direction of seeking comfort and ease through something chemical or something outside of me. Can you speak a little bit to the way you look at environment and the way you describe it so beautifully in this book?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically how psychologists look at environment is that, so a common concept is that almost all behavior is subconscious. Like right now we're all breathing. You're doing so many things that you're unaware of. You're sitting in a chair, you're holding yourself. I mean,
I'm not breathing right now. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
But I mean, like, there's so many things that we're unaware of. Like, consciously, we're thinking of a few things, but almost everything else is what we would call outsourced to the environment. And it's subconscious. And what psychologists call this process is automaticity. Basically, what happens is this behavior becomes automatic. Like, think about driving a car. When you first start driving a car, it takes so much effort to learn how to push the pedals, and like you're thinking about everything. After you get used to it, you adapt to that environment, it becomes automatic and subconscious. And so all of a sudden you can drive, talk on the phone, you don't know what's going on. And so that's basically how most behavior is it's subconscious, it's not, you're not aware of it, and it's all being shaped by what's around you. And so, patterns happen that need to be disrupted. And basically what I talk about in the book is that a lot of the transformational experiences that need to happen must happen outside of that trigger-laden environment. So when I was 19 years old, I was playing World of Warcraft about 12 hours a day, and I talk about this in the book. My diet consisted of pizza, Mountain Dew. I barely graduated high school. And now I'm almost done with a PhD in psychology. But if you had looked at me 10 years ago when I was 19, living at my cousin's house, playing World of Warcraft all day, addicted to caffeine, not doing anything with my life, you would have said that kid has zero ambition and probably zero intelligence, because I literally barely graduated high school. And I was stuck. I had become a product of a really broken situation. My father was a meth addict. And he's since recovered, and he's in a great place, and he's done recovery work now for others. But I had no stability. I had zero foundation, and then what happened was, and this brings in a lot of the mind, body, and environment. It brings it all in. I got invited by a cousin to start just running a little bit, and I started running around a track just a few times a week. It was my escape from 12 hours a day of World of Warcraft. And while I was running, and then he quit, I decided I'm going to start running, and I'm just going to run for a little bit. And while I was running in the middle of the night, because I had zero schedule, I wasn't working, I was living at my mom's apartment, during my runs I started to give myself some thinking. After I was outside that environment, I was out, and I allowed myself to start thinking about what the freak just happened to me. At age 11, my parents got divorced. All of a sudden, my dad's house becomes this environment filled with drug addicts. I watched my brother go through insane, he goes through hell, basically, my younger brother. And he ends up getting into drugs heavy himself, and I find myself barely graduating from high school, and I'm just like, what the freak happened? That was me starting to process my trauma, and I had gone through a lot of other things I won't mention here. And so being out of that environment, also just exercising the body and allowing my mind to think, allowed me to start thinking big picture of, I don't want this life, and I am stuck, and the only way that I can fix this is to get out. So I ended up serving a humanitarian mission for 2 years. And immediately what happened was I changed my role. I was now a different person. I would change my behavior. I was focusing on other people and giving and helping people in far worse situations than myself. I was reading good books. I was in an environment that facilitated incredible growth. And my mission president, who was my leader, said, Ben, one of the things that I want you to understand is that you can quickly revert back to the person you were before you come on this experience if you go back to the same environment. He said, first off, you need to come back. The worst thing you could do is go back and be the person you were before, after having these 2 years of changing your life, of helping other people, of having this transformational experience. And so when I came home from this 2-year experience, totally a different person, I felt everything about that environment was the same. Those people, my friends, my family, they did not know the person I had become. They could only see me one way, and they were talking to me the same way. We were talking as if we were back in high school. The language was the same. I mean, they saw me one way, and they couldn't, and I knew if I had stayed there that I would be stuck. I would have reverted back immediately. So I left, and I started studying psychology. And so one of the ideas I talk about in the book is that transformational experiences can usually only happen outside of your routine environment. That's why I come to Genius Network, is because in this environment, outside of my house, my mind is free to get transformational experiences. And so environment is very important to clarity. It's very important to making big decisions. It's very important to changing your life. I mean, even Joel Weldon, who is a public speaking guy here, he was talking about the experience that changed his life and led him to changing his diet and stuff. It was while he was on a plane. He wasn't at home. And so you need to get out of your environment to get clarity.
I love it. I love it. So important. So Joe, you have created a transformational environment.
Well, I do my best, and I try to bring together people that have enormous skills and wisdom and curate a lot of that knowledge, and that's what I'm trying to do in the field of addiction and recovery, because my goal, as you mentioned earlier, is to change the global conversation about how people view and treat addicts with compassion instead of judgment, and find the best forms of treatment that have efficacy and share those with the world, which is the mission that we're on. So it's no coincidence we're all sitting here together doing this right now, because that's what's really important to me. And one thing I do want to mention too, like here is a smartphone, right? Okay, just a phone. And, you can be in the most beautiful, peaceful environment. Say you go on a vacation and you're out on the beach, but you bring your phone with you, and let's say you're a gambling addict, or
you just altered the environment.
Yeah, exactly. And so, with technology, which is incredible, because we wouldn't even be able to do this interview right now,
here, yep.
And this is on Facebook Live as we're sitting here talking, and people are watching this. And I'm sorry,
Yep.
I'm not making any comments right now because we're right in the middle of recording this, really, for for your program. So technology allows us to reach a lot of people and do a lot of cool things. Now, the reverse of it is it could be very damaging too, because if you're an internet addict and you're getting a dopamine hit from how many likes or how constantly looking, then you could alter an environment completely.
Yep.
And it's kind of like the analogy I gave one of my clients many years ago, a guy named Bill Phillips, who wrote a book called Body for Life. He wrote about it in his second book, where a lot of people have drank beer, a lot of people have gone to church. Most of the time you don't drink beer in church, although I'm sure some addicts probably have, So
without question.
Yeah. The thing, though, is like there's certain things that just don't mix together. And today, I think so much of the struggles with addiction is that we're constantly connected. And if you sit and think about connectivity, we can be connected electronically but disconnected as humans. So, you want to utilize technologies to serve you, not to enslave you. And we have a ton of people that are technology addicts. I mean, all the process.
I would say almost all of millennials and under are technology addicts, and potentially don't even know it, but think about it. They were born into an environment, and it's subconscious, it's automatic. I mean, it's the norm, and the norm in any environment shapes the options in that environment. You know what I mean? So when we talk about, like, is it willpower or is it something else? Like, a good example of this is, like, women. I've been thinking about, like, do women have more willpower in society now? And is that why they're so great in business and in education versus women 150 years ago? Or are they in a different environment that makes it more accessible? Is it, you know what I mean? Is it context or is it willpower?
Right.
It's context.
Well, we can just take our immediate surrounding to explore that just a little bit. So for those who are not aware, we're at Joe Polish's Genius Network, where a group of people have come together essentially to support each other in their business pursuits, but it, of course, bleeds over into life and relationship. This is one of a few rooms that I've been in my life. I would probably count, in most cases, the 12 steps in this, and I would count certain yogic circles that I've been a part of, where everybody in the room wants everybody else in the room to succeed. Now, if that's the playing field and those are the rules in that room, that's a pretty powerful environment. And I can assure you that that's not the environment in which most people who grow up and experience addiction grow up in.
Yeah.
So you have created a transformational space. And if you wouldn't mind speaking a little more about the idea of transformational relationship, as you spoke about earlier today.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that drew me to Genius Network was just the idea of certain relationships can change you. So the idea is that when two parts come together, the whole is fundamentally different from the sum of the parts. Like, because I'm a systems thinker, I think when you change a part, you change the whole. And when I came into this environment, when I joined Genius Network, I realized that there were all sorts of people who were focused on giving, focused on gratitude, focused on growth. Rather than focused on taking, competing. It was all about collaboration and sharing and serving. And basically there's I frame it with, there's two different types of relationships. There's either transactional or there's transformational. And in transactional relationships, you're there for a very specific purpose. And if that purpose isn't being fulfilled, you're done, whereas with transformational relationships, you don't necessarily know where it's going to go. So, like, there's 3 stages of conscious evolution. There's the socializing self, which is a person that's completely dependent on other people. This is like someone who, everything that they do, it's calculated. They're doing what they think other people want them to do. That's the lowest stage. And that's where I think a lot of people find themselves in an addiction, is they're trying to fit in, or they're doing whatever the situation merits. The next level up is what's called the authoring self, which is like high independence. It's like, you have a worldview, you have your goals, and you have your agenda. And if the situation doesn't allow for your agenda, you get rid of it. You know what I mean? And then there's the highest level, which no one talks about in Western culture because we're so focused on the self. And the highest level is the transforming self. And the transforming self is where a person comes together and they contribute, they serve, they give, and they come and they become changed. Like, and that's what's happened with Joe. Like, you know, just for example, I was very interested in addiction, but I was not as interested in this topic as I am now, because I've literally been changed by my association with Joe. And I did not know that was going to happen. I didn't anticipate it. It wasn't part of my agenda. My agenda was to come here and learn how to become a better writer. I didn't realize that I was going to come here and start to really be changed by the situation and realize, holy cow, there's these other things that I need to focus on as well. So a part of transformational relationships, obviously, is that you have to be transformed by them. You have to be vulnerable. And, you know, in addiction, you know, you're not going to transform if you're not going to really be humble and open to the environment, you know, and you're not going to be, you know, and so, yeah, transformational relationships are just the types of relationships where you're giving, you're serving, you're extremely grateful, and you expect to change, and you expect your worldview to be changed, and you expect to sometimes change the direction of your life because of something new that changed you, and you got to be willing to be changed.
Yes. Joe, can you take that and apply it to 12-step recovery, which you're familiar with, but also just recovery in general? The importance of the transformational relationship in recovery.
Well, yeah, I mean, by adding one thing here that happens is the ability to ask for help. And so when you walk into a 12-step room, you're powerless. You may not say that in the very beginning of your first meeting, but you're basically... you know, when we did an interview before, I love what you said. You said, because 12 steps is based on attraction, not promotion, and you said it's really about desperation, right? Because it's not very attractive. And I got to tell everyone this story, okay? Like when I've gone to 12 steps on and off. I mean, I've had times where I just would, go off, and I was, not. I was doing half measures, but I've been going to meetings for over 20 years and all kinds of different 12 steps. And I remember going to my first Sex Addicts Anonymous meeting. And so a little bit of my backstory, I was basically raped and molested as a kid. My mother died when I was 4 years old. My father never remarried. I never saw relationships as an intimate act of love and oneness when I was being molested as a kid. I was paid not to say anything. It wired in my head that sex is shameful, it's dirty, you pay for it. And so, that led to some very dark sort of perspectives, and I had an intimacy disorder. I didn't know how to connect. I had no perspective on that. And so I was struggling with sexual addiction, and not only unhealthy sex, but also sexual anorexia, where I couldn't be sexual without feeling shame. I mean, in all addictions have levels of binging and purging. It's not like moderation. That doesn't work really well for an addict.
No.
And so so the thing with going into my very first meeting, and this is a true story. So I go to a place that's close to a hospital. There's like a medical center that was next door to a hospital. And that was his first, SAA meeting. And I go up to the front desk. I mean, you have to go through an entrance, and there's like a waiting area, and there's literally people in this waiting room, and there's two ladies behind the desk. And I'm like, I don't even know where to go. There's no suite number. And I go up to them, I'm like, is there a SAA meeting here? And they're like, what's SAA? I go, Sex Addicts Anonymous. She looks back, she goes, where's the Sex Addicts meeting? And like everyone and I'm just, I'm like, and there's all this like, how do you,
all this shame.
Oh yeah. And so I go to this meeting, and that was like my first, but the fact is none of that's attractive, right? That's like one of those movie things where someone's like, what, I won't say it, but
painful.
They yell for something throughout the whole store. But the fact is, you gotta show up. I mean, for yourself. You're doing it for yourself. The one thing about meetings is you're not there for where you've been. you're there for where you want to go. And if you go to a meeting because, oh, I'm a bad person, oh, I'm shameful, no, you're going there because there's some conflict with your own value system. If your behavior or your actions, if you didn't care, you wouldn't feel guilt, you wouldn't feel shame. So the fact that you feel these feelings is really an opportunity for you to actually change and to do something better. And it's hard. I understand it's hard. It's grueling at times. It is a simple program, like they say, it really is, but it's not easy. And it depends on, it depends on where you're at. But the fact is, no one recovers in isolation. And if you don't, and you're as sick as your secrets. I absolutely believe you're as sick as your secrets. And these things will fester. And if you don't bring them out, all of the crazy making, all of the stuff that may have occurred in your life, it's actually the raw material for you to actually build something greater. And any person that has really taken on doing recovery, and they talk about the gifts, they talk about the promises, you meet people that, and I've met many, and I'm now there in my stage. It is the greatest gift you could ever give yourself, but nothing feels good in the middle. So it's going to require courage. It's going to require surrender. It's going to require connecting with people. It's going to require you putting on a new pair of glasses and seeing the world in a different way. But what's the alternative? Suffering, struggling, feeling hopeless. And so if you feel absolutely hopeless, or you have a loved one that seems hopeless, hope heals. And so going to an environment where there is hope, going into an environment where people believe in you more than you believe in yourself is critical. And a lot of people will bash 12-step programs, for one, because they don't understand them, or they might have gone to a meeting and they not given it a fair shot. They didn't like the people there, or it didn't resonate with them. There's all kinds of different meetings. There are some that I've gone to, I couldn't stand them. And there's others that were amazing.
Yep.
And I'll tell you, it's like, but just being of service. Life gives to the giver and takes from the taker. And one of the beautiful things about 12-step communities is people are there for one reason. They want to reduce suffering. They want to eliminate suffering. They want to get better. They want to help others. And, if you help other people, I wrote this thing up, How to Have a Great Day, many, many years ago. And it was like all these tips, drink a smoothie in the morning, exercise, take a walk, write a letter to yourself. If you feel hopeless and you don't have any inspiration, write a letter to yourself, go to the library. I mean, all these things that would just activities that can make a great day. But one of the last ones I wrote is, if you don't think any of these things work, then go volunteer. Go to a homeless shelter, go to an animal shelter,
yes.
Go to a children's hospital, go to a burn unit, go to an assisted living home. Because when you start being of service to other people, and you start helping people that in many cases are far worse off than you, I don't know how it works, but it just does. It simply gets you out of your own head, and it makes you feel better. And there's rooms everywhere where people are willing to, that have been in the same muck in different ways. And once you realize you're not the only one that's going through the suffering and the struggles. And I will tell you, this is, people have different perspectives. I've been in high-profile groups with famous Academy Award-winning actors and actresses, NBA players, NFL players. I mean, sometimes the rich and famous, that people don't see these silent battles that some of these people fight, and they think, I wish I had their money. I mean, some of these people are suicidal, and some of them do kill themselves. Yes. I mean, like what we're doing with Artists for Addicts, some of the world's greatest performers have taken their own lives because they're fighting these silent battles.
That's right.
And they don't get out of them. So don't fight silent battles. That's why you go to a 12-step meeting. That's why you reach out to community. Yes. Because it's not about money. It's not about fame. You can have all of these things, but if you're disconnected from yourself, life is still incredibly painful.
Thank you so much. Well, since you brought up service and being of service, we should stay on that for a moment more. I'll just simply say that we're delving a lot into the 12 steps here, and that's fine. It's a path of recovery, and for those who are not familiar with it, and if you're called, just look into it. And I want to quickly say, before we talk about service, there's 12-step meetings, and then there's the 12-step program, and two very different things. The meetings, that's the fellowship in the community, and it's an important component of this thing. And then you have the program itself, the doctrine, if you will, of the 12 steps. It's a process to create in an individual a spiritual awakening, and it works if you really, really apply yourself to it. The 12th of the 12 steps is about service, and it basically states, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these first steps, now that I'm here at step 12, I'm going to try to carry this message to other alcoholics, addicts, and to practice the principles that I've now learned in all my affairs. So that's kind of a commitment to be present and to show up for anybody who happens to need the same gift that you've been given. Mm-hmm. It seems that the rest of the work, 1 through 11, is really about clearing a way so a person could actually show up to be of service. Now, all of us have experience with service. I was wondering if you could talk about the psychological perspective on one human being connecting in that way with another human being, of actually showing up to be of service to somebody, not looking for anything in return, not transactional, as you put it. If you could expand on that a bit.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I mean, just briefly going back to my own story, when I went on that service mission and just stopped focusing on my own needs, and I just literally, I don't think I had, I think I was a very selfish person, honestly, before that experience. I was only focused on my own wants, only focused on my own dopamine, you know what I mean? And
I do.
Yeah. You know what I mean?
Actually.
Yeah, and I think that when you actually get, if you actually put yourself in a homeless shelter, or if you actually went and saw the pain that other people are going through, and you actually, so Sean Stevenson is a mutual friend of ours, and he said that recently, I'll jump into the psychology in a second, but he was in Africa, maybe 6 months ago or something, in one of the small villages, just saw stuff that he'd never been exposed to. And while in that environment, he got all sorts of epiphanies. These types of things are available in certain situations.
And this is a little guy in a wheelchair who's never walked his entire life. Yeah. So he already has challenges most people never have to contend with.
Spinal bifida?
No.
Yeah, well, it's brittle bone condition.
So Sean, has been in a wheelchair his whole life. He's 2 or 3 feet tall, been through so much pain, been told he was going to be dead at age 19, he's turned into this amazing guy. But even he's always seeking transformation. And, he was in this really rough experience. And ultimately, he realized, in those types of situations, you can kind of have an opening, you can get woken up to the fact that, oh my gosh, there's a lot of pain in the world. Mm-hmm. It's not all about me. There's a lot of, and that's really what happened to me, was just seeing that there's a lot of pain out there. And, I think you need to have those types of experiences and then try to just, you don't have to have the answers. You don't need to actually be profound and eloquent and brilliant at knowing the solution. You just need to start with a willingness to actually say, I want to just start connecting, as Joe would say, and so that, I think that, the psychology is just really simple. It's just the fact that when a person feels appreciated, all of a sudden their self-esteem, their confidence goes up, their ability to be resilient to challenges. And a lot of people grow up in situations, as you've discussed, where there's not really a lot of love. There's hostile environments. You know what I mean? There's environments where people have to isolate because there's no one they can actually connect to. And so if you can go into any situation and literally just be present with someone, you don't need to say anything. I had a psychology professor who talked a lot about altruism and just about what is altruism. A lot of times it's literally just sitting with a person and actually just being with them, connecting with them. You don't need to be a brilliant speaker. You don't have to know how to help and heal someone. Sometimes you just literally need to care and look them in the eyes and be there with them and say you are a human being. And if people connect, sometimes you'll be the first person in a person's life who will actually connect. And then they'll feel valued. They'll feel somewhat worth. And obviously you as the recipient of that is going to be transformed. You're going to realize that. But them as the recipient, of feeling appreciated, feeling acknowledged, feeling that someone out there noticed them, you know what I mean? That changes everything for them. It makes them for a second feel valued, and it gives them a little bit of confidence to move forward.
And the feedback loop to you is...
yeah. But as we've all said, connection is really the key. And sometimes you have to be the person to initiate that connection, because a lot of people are so broken, so hurt, and have never actually done it.
Yes.
And so I just think, first off, you need to be exposed to the fact that there's a lot of pain in the world. There's a lot of problems. And yeah, you have a lot of problems too. We're all going through it. But, the fastest way to transform yourself is to help transform other people. And to, that's what Viktor Frankl said. Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning said that happiness and success cannot be achieved by focusing on yourself. You have to transcend yourself. That's actually the only way to experience self-actualization, is to experience transformation. You have to transition above yourself and focus on a cause outside of yourself, or to surrender to another person. It can't be about you. So the only way to actualize yourself is to transcend yourself and to focus on something bigger.
Yes. Thank you so much. I want to help viewers work with the concept of relapse. Here we're talking about falling back into a behavior that a person for themselves has already demonstrated is self-harming. Obviously, not everybody relapses when they get sober. Some people get sober and stay sober. But I don't think that's the norm. I don't have any statistics to back that up, but I wouldn't think that's the norm from what I've sort of seen around this last 25 years. So, on the one hand, I want us to sort of explore, what is that? Why would somebody do that? And explore also if we can do away with the shame and make this suggestion for what to do if and when that were to happen in your life. Not suggesting that it will, but if it did, what would be the next steps? If we could talk a little bit about that.
Well, what I would say, to follow up with what you said about the shame, the difficulty of relapse, to borrow from my friend Pat Carnes' model of the addictive cycle. There's it starts with preoccupation, where you're thinking about it. You're thinking about the drink, the drug, the behavior, the gambling, the sex, the food, the internet. You're just preoccupied with it. It's taking up mind space. Then there's the ritualization, where addicts have a process of doing their addiction. They have a way. They drive to certain places. They hang out with certain people. They go to certain things. I mean, there's rituals attached to their addiction. If you think of your life in addiction, what are the rituals? And for areas of your life that work, there's ways that you do things that work. And in areas of your life that don't work, you have a ritual for causes it to not work.
So many.
The third is the compulsive act. That could be the drug doing, the drinking, the behavior. So it's the compulsivity, the compulsive act. And then the fourth is despair. And in despair, you're in shame and guilt. And so what happens when you're in shame and guilt? The quickest way to make that shame and guilt at least go away temporarily is to start the addictive cycle all over again. So you start thinking about it, ritualization, then there's the act, and they don't get out of that trap. So if you've relapsed, most of the self-talk of addicts is very negative, because they beat the shit out of themselves.
Absolutely.
Right? And when I spent most of my especially my early life, all the way through my 40s, most of that, the self-talk, if it was ever written down and recorded anywhere, you'd be like, God, this is a vicious human being. Didn't say it to other people, but I certainly said it to myself. And in that state, I would relapse quite a bit. Drugs and alcohol, I got clean from a long time ago. The sexual stuff, the workaholism, that was very difficult, because it was like, well, how do you know what's a relapse? What's a bottom line? That sort of thing. But my life was certainly unmanageable, although I was a functional addict. I could still run a business. I became a millionaire before the age of 30 being an active addict. It's crazy, but man, did I enjoy it? Hell no. It doesn't matter. A lot of it was just trying to escape this sort of pain. And so when I relapsed, I'd immediately go into these negative cycles. So the main thing I want to say is, it doesn't, like, self-care being gentle on yourself, which is almost impossible for someone in active addiction. They're really not that gentle. That's why community is so critical. That's why being around people that believe in you. That's why listening to what you're doing yoga, tapping into things that get you out of this crazy, negative mind space, and being able to connect with nature, being able to connect with anything makes you feel better. Animals. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that you could do. So as soon as relapse happens, if you don't immediately define it as I'm a bad, horrible, the reason it is happening is because people just want to be out of pain. I believe addiction is a solution. Like our friend Gabor Mate says, the question is not why the addiction, but why the pain. And if you're in pain, you want to scratch the itch. If you're lonely, if you're sad, and you're in a halt state, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, if you're depressed, there's nothing wrong with wanting those negative feelings to go away. The problem is the mechanism you choose to scratch the itch. Because, addiction works, but it could kill you. It could hurt people around you. It could cause you to lose your job, your marriage, your relationships, everything.
Short-term gain.
Yeah, exactly.
Long-term loss.
It's a terrible solution because there's this thing called consequences. But the reason people are relapsing is not because you're a moral degenerate. And that's the whole thing. And so the judgment is, well, first off, if you feel like you're a terrible human, you're more apt to relapse. If you put yourself in places and environments where you start uncovering all of this, you start getting these secrets and these silent battles shared with others, and you start, then it lessens. And so, not that I'm perfect at knowing what the solution is for relapse. What I do know after many years of being in it is there's really no value for you to beat yourself up. Being in active addiction, you're already beating yourself up. You're already having tons of pain.
We all agree on that.
Dousing more suffering on yourself just begets more relapse.
Yes.
And so as soon as it happens, use the tools of recovery. I mean, and if you start feeling these cravings, as difficult as it is, the 500-pound phone call, make the phone call, have people available to you. Get yourself out of the house or somewhere to try to, break into the just to break it. And the beauty is, the more you actually do it, you actually build up an ability and a capability. And I'll say this quote, and it's worth writing down. It's from a book many years ago called The Book of Survival by Anthony Greenback. And I'm not going to say it exactly right, but it says, in order to get through an impossible situation, which it seems impossible, when you feel like your life is hopeless, you feel some people commit suicide because they feel like they got no solution.
Absolutely.
So let's just use the word. So to get through an impossible situation, you don't need the reflexes of a Grand Prix driver, the muscles of a Hercules, the mind of an Einstein. You simply need to know what to do. And there are lots of people that have gone through relapses of every kind that have prevented it, going to meetings. I mean, you just simply need to know what to do. And the reason people are watching this right now, either for themselves or someone else, is because they're looking for what to do. And you have spent at least, I think you're 26 years sober now. You have spent many, many years, and you're bringing some of that through your summit, through, this. You're bringing different people's perspectives on how to do this. And sit with it. And, feelings are not facts. If you feel terrible and horrible, and I must go out and do this thing,
yes.
Well, it's not going to kill you if you don't. Sitting with yourself will not kill you. What happens, though, is the brain, the thoughts, these things at the time actually somehow convince you that I must go do this negative thing there. But the longer you go without it, the more you can, and believe it or not, and I never did believe this. There were times where I thought this craving will never go away.
Yes.
No matter what I do, it just will not go away. It sucks. I hate it. And there are so many times I just didn't want to be alive. I just wanted to not exist anymore. And I'll tell you though, if you keep doing the work, if you get around the right people, if you just take care of yourself as best as you can, there is a point where it will dissipate and it will not be there anymore, and you'll be like, oh my God, I never could have imagined that. And that's what I pursue.
Oh my God, I'm free.
Right.
You care if I share some thoughts on
please.
What's the word again?
Relapse.
Relapse. Yeah.
Yes.
So to be honest with you, I've I would consider definitely a caffeine addiction, probably for the last 6-7 years.
It's a juicy one. Anybody out there like caffeine? But, just checking.
And what's interesting about mine is,
it's a juicy one.
Yeah, so like I don't drink coffee. I don't drink soda pop. I don't even drink energy drinks. What got me into caffeine, and basically I think what a lot of addiction is it's obviously associated either with a behavior or with a relationship. And me and my brother and my dad, we all love fitness, and so there's caffeinated pre-workouts. And there's a quote that I think is really interesting.
Caffeinated pre-workouts.
Oh, yeah.
Drinks.
Oh, yeah. This is a huge... I would say that if you go to a fitness gym, like let's just say you go to a Gold's Gym or something, at least 70% of, at least the men, but more and more women are getting into these, are on stimulated pre-workout supplements that have at least 200 milligrams of caffeine, but a lot, which is like 3 or 4 cups of coffee, but a lot of them now are up into like the 500 milligrams of caffeine realms, which is like... taking immediately before a workout like 10 cups of coffee worth, and it's synthetic. And so anyways, this stuff,
incredible.
Well, when we're talking about environment, we're talking about rules and norms. This is the norm in which millennials are operating when it comes to fitness. And obviously the problem is that you get, the problem with dependence in psychology is that you feel like you can't do the activity without it. So there's a really good book that, I've recently read talking about the easy way to stop smoking. And he talked about how he got to the point where he couldn't even, take off a light bulb without smoking because he was so dependent on it. He felt like he couldn't do anything without it. And so...
Alan Carr's book.
Yeah. And it's really good. But with fitness, I got to the point where I got dependent on it, where I didn't believe I could have the same level of workout with it. And I felt really guilty about it because not physically. I was in my 20s. I didn't feel like I was destroying my body as much. But when I'm talking about spirituality, I felt like what I was doing was stopping my ability to experience spirituality, to have connections with God, to experience personal inspiration. And I felt it. And so multiple times I would tell my wife, I'm like, I'm done using these products, and I would throw them away. And then I would, a couple weeks later, just feel like I need to do it. And the problem is that I got to the point where I associated it with my writing, because I would work out in the morning and I would just be totally on fire because I just written in my journal, just had like an amazing inspirational session, just worked out, and I was very conscious about it. I wasn't taking 500 milligrams. I'd sometimes take like half a scoop, but I'd still get the caffeine, and then I would write like a racehorse, and I would write an amazing stuff, and I was becoming successful with my writing. And so I think one of the fears that happens with relapse is that you begin to... there's 2 components of addiction. One is fear of the unknown. You don't actually know what's going to happen if you stop this addiction. One of my fears was, am I going to still be able to write? Mm-hmm. Because I started to tie it to this activity.
Sure.
And so, you fear what you don't know, and you also don't believe that life could be better without it. You know what I mean? I started to think, am I? And so one of the things that really helped me, and I feel I've come to a place where I believe that, I'm good. Like I'm aware of my own weaknesses and aware of triggers and stuff, but like I feel like I'm at a different place than I've ever been with this, and I'm pretty confident, and I'm going to seek to surround myself with people who help me. One is I started to seek out information that disconfirmed my bias. So I started to read everything I could about the negatives of pre-workout. I just started to study it rather than avoid it. Rather than justify my... I started reading everything. What is this stuff going to do long-term to my brain? What are all the negatives? And I started reading case studies of people... And I just started reading all the negatives of these stimulant products. And I started to educate myself and just say, and confirm the bias that I had kept suppressing, that I knew that this stuff internally... And then I told my wife, I think I've had a problem with this. And I've never told her that before. She's like... Why, you keep buying this stuff. Why? I'm like, I really think I have a problem. Like, I'm serious. And I told Joe, I said, I texted Joe and I said, Joe, like, I think I have an addiction to this stuff.
Yes.
And so I started telling people and just admitting this weakness, and I started studying the things. And then I read a book. It's called Blue Zones. I don't know if either of you have heard of this. It's, in my opinion, the best book on longevity.
Yes.
Holy cow. One of the things I think about addiction is obviously we're talking about dopamine. We're talking about short-term wins and long-term losses. And I think the opposite of seeking dopamine is confidence. Confidence is living in alignment with what you want to do. Whereas it's really easy to do what you know you shouldn't do, and you can get a quick dopamine hit. You can't get confidence that way. Confidence is acting in alignment with who you want to be.
That's brilliant.
But in Blue Zones, I read that book recently, and it talked about, the environments that create the most centurions, people who live to a 100. And none of these people have stimulants in their diets. You know what I mean? Like, they are very holistic. You know what I mean? And I'm just like, they don't need it. They don't need it. And I started to think long term. I started to think longevity. I want to live long. I want my brain to operate at high levels when I'm in my 70s and 80s and 90s. I don't want to kill myself right now. And so thinking holistically, studying all the stuff that was wrong, starting to believe that my life could be great without it, and that I could continue to write well without it, and just developing that confidence is, I believe, what's going to really help me to not relapse.
How long's it been?
Oh, it's been months now.
Months?
Yeah.
No caffeine?
Yeah. Well, I mean, no caffeine associated with that activity.
Yes.
I think I was with a friend once and had a soda, but it was like, that was because I was in his environment and I was supporting him watching a basketball game, but it was totally not the same.
I understand.
It was not the same at all.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's an incredible story. And the way I look at it from either the Chinese medicine perspective or the yogic perspective is vitality. The Chinese would say qi, we would say prana. And these caffeine drinks are you're just burning the candle at both ends. Any way you cut it. And the way that I know that from my own personal experience is when I go on a cleanse with my wife, and most people know I have never had a cup of coffee in my life. I just never tried it. I was raised by an English nanny, and so it was always black tea. That was the thing, and so I was really hooked to the gills on black tea, like as a 2-year-old, 3-year-old kid, and I have been a dance with it ever since. When I'm in it and I go on a cleanse, low-grade headache for about 2 or 3 days. On the third day, it passes, and usually I'll lay down at 2 o'clock in the afternoon for a little nap, and I'll wake up like 15 hours later because my nervous system is completely reset. And I recognize how exhausted I've been, that I have been tired without recognizing that I'm tired because of the caffeine. I watch this with people who I work with in early recovery. They come in all the time, and what are people in early recovery looking for but impact? Why? Because the most impactful thing in their life has just been taken away. So they are looking for anything that can give them impact, some adventure, something. Look to whatever you can do to get impact. And so these guys I work with, it's like 3 monster drinks, it's like 4 double espressos, and 5 days of this behavior. Later on, they come in and they're like, I don't feel too well. I don't feel too well. And I'm like, well, nobody would feel well. You've poisoned yourself.
It's in the college world, because I'm still on campus, when you think about dependence and the belief that you cannot do something unless you have this substance in your body, you can't. I've seen a lot of college kids now. They really don't believe that they can study for a test unless they've got or
Adderall.
Yeah, well, Adderall is the same thing.
Right.
At this point, I have so many friends who believe that they're ADHD or something because that's now the environment we live in. It's now the norm. It's the norm to have ADHD and to not be able to study and go to college without Adderall, or to not be able to pound energy drinks all day to get through the test.
Wow.
That's the norm in this environment,
Yes.
And if you'd gone to college 30 years ago, you would have been able to get through without caffeine, but you can't do it anymore for most kids,
Yes.
because that's just the expectation. That's the rules of the situation. And so you can't study for a test anymore for most of these kids without pounding a rock star, and saying, I'm going to be able to focus for 3 hours now.
Right.
And then after that, you can't study without it now.
Yes. Well, these are from that perspective. Definitely, I personally have some concerns for the next generation.
That's why I wrote the book.
Right, and so final comments for people who are watching this. If each of you could just give a 60-second or so pep talk to the person who is down on themselves and feels like I've tried so many times and I'm still here. and I feel like I should be further along than I am, and yet I'm not, and I'm struggling in my relationships, and I'm struggling in my career, and I'm struggling in my family, and I'm struggling in my life, and I don't know what to do. If you could speak to that person, each of you. We'll start with you, Joe.
Well, I would say I haven't had caffeine since September 2016, not a drop.
Is that right?
That's true.
Oh,
yeah.
Joe is, he's had sugar, what, like 6 or 7 times?
No, well, now I think I'm at like 13 times now
He's had
since
sugar.
September
He's had
2016.
He's had sugar. I mean, he's very vital and focused. You know, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I just turned 50, and so I'm trying to in this stage. Well, so here's the advice that I would have is I have a friend who started Spartan races, kind of a crazy guy, Joe Descendant. He interviewed me, and he has this whole thing about does it make the boat go faster? And so anything that doesn't make your boat go faster is going to slow you down. Putting anything, behavior, chemicals, food, anything that numbs you and slows you down is not going to get you to where you want to go. However, I understand cravings that are uncontrollable. I understand the power of sitting in a room with someone else who's gone through suffering, and it's useful to put yourself in relationship with people that understand mutual suffering, because through the suffering is where you find the recovery. Being able to sit with yourself. In order to have a breakthrough, you got to break something. You got to break belief systems, and there's a lot you can learn, certainly through us, through this, and there's a lot you can unlearn, and unlearning is more important than learning. And that's the beauty of recovery, is so much of the recovery is not what you're going to, it's not about being smart or that you're stupid, it's that you have learned maladaptive ways to try to cope with life. Now it's time for you to unlearn those and to find alternative forms of behavior and ways of coping. It is absolutely possible.
No matter how many times you may have failed.
Absolutely. I failed thousands of times. I freaking spent so much time struggling and hating my life and trying to do image management with being like a successful entrepreneur. But see, workaholism is a respectable addiction, and so you need practices. You got to get into your body. The issues are in the tissues. If you've never done yoga before, do one of Tommy's yoga videos or your wife Kia Miller's videos. Go somewhere. Go to groups, meet people, get community, do the things that Tommy recommends. You know, if you just simply do what you write about in Recovery 2.0, your life will get better. It will improve. You will feel better. It may not happen instantaneously, but, you know, if it was that damn easy, everyone would live, a wonderful life. And we live on a planet of people struggling, and the struggle is real for a lot of people. But feelings are not facts. Even if you don't feel like it, just do it anyway, and utilize as much courage and resourcefulness that you possibly can, and that's where connection comes in. And you know, just you're doing it right now. The fact that you're listening to us, I believe, is a part of you that's like, yeah, this makes sense to me. You know, and it may not feel like it makes sense, but there's a part of you that knows this is useful, or I don't think you'd be here with us right now.
Thank you, Joe, so much. Benjamin.
Absolutely, yeah. So Dan Sullivan, he says something that's very important. He says it's better to surround yourself with people who remind you of your future than people who remind you of your past. And obviously, if you're someone who's dealt with addiction, you have a lot of relationships and attachments that are focused on the past and focused on addiction. And I would just say that you absolutely can transform. As a person who studied psychology, but also as a person who's gone through a lot of self-transformation, you can become a different person. You can become changed. And that's what transformational experiences and relationships are all about. One thing that Tommy talked about today was the difference between having an intensive experience and just dipping your toe in. You know, you can watch this video, and you could even watch it once a day for, you know, a month. But that's not going to have the same level of impact as if you fully unplug yourself and just take 2 or 3 days to, you know, be around people, to talk about it, and to leave your phone and everything beside and go really deep. That's where you're going to get enough away from the weeds to actually make the impact. And so these intensive experiences where you go away for 2 or 3 days and you leave everything behind are going to potentially have more impact than just dipping in. Obviously, you need to keep dipping in, But take some time to get into an environment where you can actually be around people who can help you transform, where you can fully unplug from all of it. That's essential for entrepreneurship. It's essential to making any changes and to getting any form of healing and growth, is to give yourself plenty of time away. Your biggest epiphanies and ahas and experiences are going to happen while you're away. And you need to you need to regularly do that. That's why me and Tommy are here. We're here at Joe's environment because we need to come here to get away so that we can change. And you absolutely can change, and you can develop and become transformed. You aren't some fixed being. You are an evolving thing that can change and become different. And your desires can become different, and those temptations or those needs can change. And I can attest to that because I've changed many, many times throughout my life, surrounding myself with different types of people, seeking out certain types of information and experiences and environments. And that whole automaticity thing is you can it can become your subconscious norm to not be addicted, and to be seeking other things. So you absolutely can change.
Last thing I'll say is that thank you, is that if it fits for you, go to one of Tommy's retreats. I've been through 9 days, one of his yoga retreats for recovery in
Costa Rica.
They're amazing. I mean, the people are there, the practices. There's no way that you can immerse yourself in that and you're not going to come out a changed, better person with a lot of tools in your toolbox.
Thank you so much for that, Joe. And this is, I want to just say my final word is, what you've just experienced here, for me, this is how I party. This is my party right now. It doesn't get better for me than this. This is absolute joy for me. To get to connect with the community and all of you, and to get to connect with these people, these amazing human beings. This is me partying now. Now, if you had gone back 26 years and you'd said to me, Tommy, your idea of partying 26 years in the future is going to be hanging out with Joe Polish and Benjamin Hardy and talking to a computer screen, I would have thought you would be the one doing crack. But it was me. So some transformation has taken place, and we're blessed, and we're grateful. Thank you for listening, and if any of this has spoken to you, then take the next right step forward. Yes, we have to. He's got a temple on that. So could you kiss his temple on the left side?
I have to kiss.
Yeah. No.
All right. Geez.
This is good.
I was not expecting that, but
hey, we got to screenshot that right there.
You never know, right?
Exactly.
Thank you guys so much, and thank you both so much for sharing with the Recovery 2.0 community.
We love you and your work, man.
So great.
We love
thank
you,
you.
man.
Love both of you guys.
Blessings.
Awesome. And to those of you out there, thank you so much.